Hello, everyone. My name is Lewis Harris. Welcome to Record in Progress, the podcast I made because I felt that I didn't do enough in the wake of the 2024 election season and believed that I could have done a better job of connecting people, sharing the issues. And so I made this podcast to address that void in the next 4 years. The purpose of the podcast is to share perspectives, stories, and narratives to create understanding and a pathway towards a unified society for all of us. And so I am joined by my latest guest, who is a good friend, somebody I highly respect, one of the few people I consider a mentor, especially in the years that I was promoting social justice in my home community. Would you please share your name with the audience?
Benjamin Young.
Yeah. It has a ring that you don't understand unless you're from Snohomish County. So it's good to see you, Ben. How do you identify yourself?
Black cis male.
Excellent. In what state and city do you live in?
Currently, I live in Concord, North Carolina. It's a little small city, but it's like the sixth or seventh largest city in the state of North Carolina, right outside of Charlotte.
Can you remind me, North Carolina, what as a state, were they on the red side or the blue side?
They're red.
They were red. Okay. So you have a unique perspective of somebody who has helped promote equality, equity, inclusion, diversity, freedom, justice, all those things here in Washington state. And you moved over to North Carolina a few years ago, which is a red state. So you do have a perspective that is valuable. I'm glad to have you on. Could you tell us what you do?
Yeah. Currently, I'm retired. I retired from a county government, but I've always been actively engaged in social justice work.
And so what is a credential that you use most often to sell yourself on job applications, if you were?
That may be somewhat difficult for me because I think it would apply to where I was going. If I were going for, I won't break out my revolutionary speak and start talking about slave jobs.
Let's go. That's where we need to go.
If I were going to a job in the main job sector, I guess it would be my stick-to-itiveness, my ability to go after something and stay with it no matter what.
Yeah, I can attest to that. Absolutely. Okay, we learned a little bit about you, Ben. We're going to get into the meat. So how did you vote in the 2024 presidential election?
I voted for Kamala Harris, which was a no-brainer for me. I thought it was a no-brainer for the majority of the United States, but apparently it wasn't.
Right. We can get into that. I think the next question, which is, what are three feelings you have about the results of the 2024 presidential election?
Dismayed, disappointed, and I would just say dismayed and disappointed. I wouldn't try and third one because the third one would take a long, drawn-out explanation.
Brother, that's why I have you on. Talk to us.
In the words of Malcolm, it is the chickens coming on the roost. They're getting exactly what they asked for. I'm not sure that this will play out the way they feel that it will play out. I think that folks are not understanding how the economy works and two, how a president works.
Right.
And they think that they're tied together, which they are not. And so that's why I'm so dismayed. Here you have a convicted felon that we know is one of the biggest grifters in the world. And you're so caught up with the personality, the cult of personality, that you would allow a person that has none of your interest at heart to go on and continue on as the president of the United States.
Right.
It's saying what you think about the country itself. If you will, you as in general. Now, that is not to say that I'm so sold on the Democratic Party.
Right.
They did a lot wrong and they continue to do wrong.
Right.
because they're trying to get things normalized in the way that they were. They won't take a more radicalized approach. When I listen to folks talk about the Republican Party, which I think is another question, they will try and shift to the party of Lincoln, especially if we're talking to a bunch of Black people. I have to remind them that Lincoln was not a radical Republican. During that period of time, there were radical Republicans, and they were the ones moving Lincoln forward. As soon as the Dixie Democrats got involved and the races that were going on at that particular time, they removed all the radical Republicans. And so it no longer became the party of Lincoln. It became just another party. Now you have two parties that don't have much difference between the two of them.
Right.
But the party that is in now, I keep saying the party, the cult of personality that is taken over is neither one of those parties. It's a different thing altogether. And then I'll get into the misogynistic, paternalistic hopes of the dominated male society that we live in. People say that it's not true. But I look at it and I'm saying, hey, maybe he was telling the truth when he said that he was going to protect women. Based upon the way that they voted, they felt that they needed to be protected. And
Right.
my last statement about it is that it is just white people being white people. They can't get out of their own way. White people being white people.
Right. And so when you say that, like, I know what you mean because I've done the analysis, I've done the studying of white culture and how they've operated over time. But for listeners, when you say that, what are you specifically honing in on?
I am talking about the misogynistic culture or nature of people and those that adhere to it, even though they say they don't.
Right.
One of the things I have learned in social justice is that one of the scariest things quite often is a liberal white woman. She says one thing, but does exactly the opposite. She supports what she's trying to say should not exist in different ways, because all white women are not Karens.
Right. Right.
I'm not saying that they are, but you can be so liberal that you get in the way of progress.
Right. And I know exactly what you're talking about. A good example would be the keyboard warriors, right? There are people out there who will share the information, share the quote, show up to the rally, participate in the rally, but in the same rally, they will clutch their purse when a person of color comes by, or they will perpetuate the stereotypes of other cultures like Latino people or different types of Asian people. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
It is.
Okay.
The number of people, as I understand it, that voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020 are the same number of people that voted for him 24.
Right.
If you've got the same number, that means that the folks that are on the other side that were purport to be on the other side did not vote or did not show up. And I'm looking and I'm wondering why.
Right.
And it wasn't when I went to the voter precinct to vote, I didn't see any harassment. When they talked about it, that may have been something that was isolated. There was no fear of anyone that came in that line. Of course, I was only there for a set period of time.
Sure.
But I can tell you that I voted in an area that was primarily red.
Okay.
There were more Republicans voting at the location. I did early voting. At the location that I was voting, it wasn't in the city of Concord. It was in a smaller town. There was nothing there that anyone should have feared to vote. There was none of that. You can't sit down. You can't drink water. You can't have bring him. We didn't have none of that. didn't have none of that, didn't see it, and didn't hear of it in the entire county, because I live in Cabarrus County and Charlotte is in Mecklenburg.
And Charlotte, I'm assuming, is a blue county.
Charlotte, yes.
Okay.
Charlotte is a blue county. It's one of two blue counties in the state. That is, because Charlotte is the largest population in the state.
Okay.
It's the largest city in the state.
Right.
And they are 38% Black.
So connecting your point about white liberal women, and then you mentioned your voting experience in the red district. What's the connection point there?
The connection is that no matter how much they tried to say that they would, they held their nose and voted for a man. You could have had Bobo the monkey. As long as Bobo was saying that he was a male, they would have voted for him. That's how I feel. It had to be a male, period.
Right. I hear you there. Cause first of all, the podcast is not for we're not focusing on perfection. We're focusing on progress, and we accept that people have different perspectives. That's like a ground rule here. It is helpful to understand your perspective, looking at the intersections of your identity. The next question I have is, what do you fear most about the next Trump presidency?
Individually, I don't fear anything. Individually. And the reason why is because I'm sick. I don't have to I'm not beholden to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Unless he figures out a way to cut off all my funding. And I don't think that 4 years will be enough time for him to do that.
I see.
What I fear is go back to the Frantz Fanon and the Richard of the Earth. He was a French propagandist from Algeria that fought in the French. He was a trained psychiatrist, and for a period of time, he had a practice in Paris. And then he decided to go back to Algeria during the French Revolution. The Algerian Revolution. He wrote a book called The Richard of the Earth. And then it talks about the folks that are really, for lack of a better way of saying it, at the bottom of the well.
Sure.
And how they are to be treated. But it's the psychology that goes with it that allows them to say, we can't do any better. This is the best we can do. And there are a few of us that can escape. You allow yourself to be put in that position. And I don't want to shame blame. I say you allow yourself to be put in that position because psychologically you believe that you can't do any better, or the world will not allow you to do any better. It's the exact opposite, that the world will allow you, and that's the world's fear, that the wretched will rise up.
Right. You hit on an excellent point about the psychology of the class of people that are separated by economy, or white supremacy, or misogyny. We're talking about the oppressed and the mechanisms that oppressors use to keep people oppressed, which a lot of times is how you view yourself, how you view other people around you, your education, the money in your pocket. Yeah, that's an excellent point. The question is, for the people that you're talking about who voted for Trump or didn't show up to vote at all, what are they really believing about themselves and the situation?
There's the other side of it, though, because you have a lot of white people that are a part of this wretched of the earth.
Sure.
They are too, and included in that. And I'm talking more social and economic circumstances.
Yeah.
History just tells me that the psychology of it is being normalized. What the Afrikaners, the South Africans do when they wanted to really apply apartheid, they studied the chattel slave system in the United States. They studied that and from there, and that's how they applied it to the apartheid in South Africa.
So you're saying they took Jim Crow and made the South African version?
Not Jim Crow. We're not Jim Crow.
Even before that.
Originally in the United States, or in the States, or this country, because it's some days it's very difficult to call it united or even call them states. But
Right.
what I saw or what I read and hear is that you had white people that came over here as indentured servants, and you had Black people that came over here as indentured servants, slaves, what have you. Both of them were treated the same initially when they came over, because
Right.
there was ownership. So what did they do
Uh,
after a couple of the rebellions? Because initially there were white and Black in the rebellions. They
right.
separated the masters, separated the classes.
That's right. That's right.
And said, even though you don't have nothing, you're better than him.
Right.
And it's that psychology that is still prevalent today in the white community. I see it more here back in the South, because I was born and raised in the South. I spent 31 years in Pacific Northwest, but I was born and raised in the South.
Okay.
And as someone that has had rocks being thrown at him trying to go into elementary school by white kids, I'm like, I've seen enough of it, and I lived through Jim Crow.
Right.
Because even though I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., I lived in Virginia, I lived in South Carolina for short periods of time. And in North Carolina, even when I got here in 70, 71, they still had the entrance for colored people eat in restaurants. Different entrance. And this
And
was
they still were using them.
restaurant.
And they were still using them.
Yep. In 1970.
Right.
So I've seen that, but I also have seen how the liberal elite has come and made a distinction, saying they're trying to do one side, but not the other. Because I just want to call it both. Just want to call them both. And I'm using the male term rather than something non-gendered. Bubba still thinks that he has an advantage, even to this day. And you don't have to leave the state of Washington. Go to Whatcom County. Virtually any county outside of Keenan and Snohomish County. You can see it. Here, where they're blatant, they're a little bit more undercover in the Pacific Northwest.
I hear you. So part of what you're saying is that the people who didn't show up, the people who may be the liberal that either didn't show up, voted in a different direction, or voted for Trump, they are manifesting that age-old tactic of those in power to conquer and divide people using the psychological hierarchy that isn't even economic in many ways. It's economic in that a poor white person and a poor Black person, the poor white person is seen as more valuable, right? But it's not like money in your pocket, which is why you get a lot of white people throughout the DEI movement saying, I don't have any privilege. I've not benefited from my skin color in this society. Part of their response is not seeing how the powers that be, when they established this hierarchy in this country specifically, created that distinction between them and people of color that gave them privilege and did not give privilege to Black folks, right? So thank you for bringing that historical reality to the conversation, because there are a lot of reasons why people voted, and hopefully in this podcast we will illuminate many of those. We're just trying to sift through what happened and try to figure out a pathway forward. So the next question I have is, what do you hope most about the next Trump presidency?
What I see is a hope that people will have reality set in.
Right.
I thought that after his first presidency, reality would set in. His team had got their greatest propaganda going. The only reason that he ran for president the second or third time was to try and get out of jail. Now he's done that. He's not going to jail. He's not going to be convicted of any crimes in the end. what he did in Georgia, all the people around him that are going to jail as a result of being associated with him. But he's not going to jail.
Right.
So what I hope is that people wake up and see that, yes, we may be talking about the immigrants today, but I want to make sure that everyone understands, other than Native Americans, everyone here in the United States is an immigrant.
Right. Right.
And so they may be going after a select few, but it is you next. You're up next.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. And the point there is also that it starts somewhere, right? It always starts somewhere. It always seems widely beneficial to the majority of people, but then it starts to continue along that trend until, uh, you know,
And
name something that happened in history, right? Like the Nazis, right? Started somewhere, and by the end of the war, we know what happened to,
yes,
right? So it's like, I hear what you're saying. I too hoped that justice would save the day and prevent him from being in office, but we're talking about systems set up to preserve a certain way of life, and justice is oftentimes a mask for oppression or justified white supremacy or hierarchy, right?